Welcome back to the Cauldron of Curiosities and exploring folklore with the folklore explorer Sarah. That's me. Anyway, I wanted to clarify a couple of points from my earlier podcast where I realised I went down a huge rabbit hole. I'd started off talking to you about the Weavers' Guilds and how they had originated in Rome, and there were links to how they had then developed and become very much part of the patriarchy. Now, what I didn't say in that was the thought that was weaving around my head was, how did men end up in charge of a Weavers' Guild? Surely the Weavers' Guild should have been women, because most women were weaving, women were spinning, they were making blankets, they were making the carpets, the cloth that people were wearing. Archaeology supports this to say that it was the Viking women weaving cloth which created the sails that allowed the Vikings to cross the sea and conquer various nations. And there is further archaeological evidence of urns with slave girls collecting linen, or flax as it's known in the plant form, and dyeing it, spinning and weaving it to create the cloth, the colourful cloth in Egypt. Now these were often old times, weren't they? And a lot of things are attributed to what the Egyptians were doing before Christ was born. And it makes you wonder, so how did something that was predominantly female morph itself into being what appeared to be a masculine guild or masculine job? The Weavers' House in Coventry was aligned with a male weaver working with his loom, and he would have worked for a person who would have maybe told him what the colour sets would be and how they wanted the cloth to be woven. And I have heard and read some stories around, say, for example, on the Isle of Harris, when they weave the tweeds there, some people would set the colours and say this is what they wanted the cloth to look like, and then the weaver would create it in the method or the colourway that they wanted. So they did seem to be various people that were involved in the process of creating cloth, and maybe that's how there were more men involved in the decision making, because decision making appeared to become predominantly male from around the Bronze Age. And if you listen to what ChatGPT was saying, she was saying that power came with having the brawn. If the bigger the muscles you had, then the more decisions you were allowed to make regarding what was going on with the population and trade. Although going off on a tangent here, I'm aware that the trade system within Cornwall, the Phoenicians apparently wrote about the Cornuvae and said they were very easy to trade with, they weren't aggressive at all, and they were keen to barter with the Phoenicians. So I'm not sure where this whole piece about having to have big muscles comes in to when you're negotiating with other countries or other tribes on the skills that you have or the things that you're wanting to sell, the articles. What do you think? If anybody's got any thoughts on that, or you've had any stories or reading around trades that were predominantly aligned with women that then ended up being managed by men, how did that happen? I am honestly interested in how did this actually come about? Where did we lose our sovereignty that we were no longer allowed to own those things? Okay, I do get part of it, but maybe a female who is on her own would need to have the strength of the male to protect her from other men trying to steal the cloth that she was making. There's always that part of it. But it isn't always about brawn, is it? Sometimes brains can help get you out of situations. But if we were in a society that was truly respectful of each other, would we need to be beating each other up all the time? Or is there some part of human nature that consistently reverts back to the brawn part and goes, I want that, I want those bricks, so I'm going to bop you over the head with this hammer so I can have what you've got because I'm having it? A little bit like how some people are behaving in politics at the moment. I'm sure some of you may have noticed that some people behave like they're toddlers and they just want to stretch their borders and take over other areas without considering whether the other countries want to be involved in that process or not. Where does that come from, that need to impose upon others and take away their liberty? Why do we need to do that as human beings? But then, I suppose if you think about it, if we watch animals do that, don't they? They will dominate others to gain superiority, and they will get into that activity quite quickly. So maybe that animalistic behaviour is just lurking under the surface, and some of us are better at hiding it than others. So if you have any thoughts about how did we get here, how did this happen to us, and why are we seeing some trades that were predominantly female being taken over by the male guilds, which in itself then ended up with the stories being told within the mystery plays being guided by the male voice? So that's what I would like you to think on. Where did this all start? And why? Why would anybody want to do that? Let's not be rude about our comments if we're going to say why we think it happened, but I am genuinely interested in knowing if anybody has their finger on what it was that generated that change, and what did they fear from women that made them want to keep them subjugated. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Cauldron of Curiosities. If you enjoyed this dip into folklore, don't forget to follow the podcast, share it with a friend, and keep your lantern handy for the next curious tale.